All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? Of course, we're doing our series on movies about snuff films, right? And of course, we had Hardcore, which is a movie that critics generally loved. But doing this show for as long as we have, I've realized something. The critics are always correct about everything. Every time they say there's an awful movie, they're always 100% correct. And every time they say it's a great movie, they're always 100% correct. Would you agree with that,
Well,
Brian?
yeah, Taylor. I mean, they are professionals. They watch a film in good faith on its own merit. They judge it objectively. No professional critic brings their own baggage to a film, their own context. Frankly, I don't even see why people need to, like, the general public needs to watch films. We could all just listen to professional film critics tell us about them, and we'd probably be better for it.
Yeah, exactly. And, part of this series, I wanted to choose three different movies. And this next movie in the series that we're going to review is a movie that critics reviled. And I think, Brian, you and I would both agree this film is fucking awful dog shit. Would you agree with that?
I hate it. It makes my flesh crawl. I think it's godless. It sicks me out. Acting shit. Director is fucking gay, so that sucks.
He is G-worded and R-worded, that is for sure.
He is so gayed.
But yeah, so our review for this week is the fucking disgusting, awful movie 8mm. But before we get into our review of 8mm, Brian, I think you have an interesting segment about our cringe generational moment of the week. Is that correct?
I do. So we are doing, our trilogy, our series on films about snuff. Relating to that, for my generational subject, I want to talk about Leighton LaBute. Are you familiar with Leighton LaBute at all, Taylor?
I am vaguely familiar because I remember you posted a YouTube link of his various claymation or animation shorts, and it turns out that those reenactments are maybe a little bit more real than I realized.
Well, so I sent you in a private message because I was morbidly fixated on them, a video by Leighton. I would not post that publicly. So just to get into it, Leighton LaBute, aka Dolly Flesh, aka Misery Magic, was a content creator, primarily active on YouTube, also on Instagram. Born in 2000, that is verified. So prime Zoomer period here. And you'll see he has a lot of prototypical Zoomer tendencies. He claims on his social media that his birthday was September 11th, 2000. I can't find anything disputing that, but I find it kind of hard to believe. Leighton created extremely violent claymation. Pretty technically impressive, but extremely graphic. It started graphic and got further and further down, and for a while, he was sort of famous online for that. He began on Instagram and YouTube, first on Instagram just showing pictures of clay models with, I guess, what you could generously describe as horror themes, gore and torture. It did develop an audience, both because people do like that shit online, but also because he was pretty good at it. Claymation's a hard art for him to do, and he did it pretty well. When he started his YouTube account, he began posting, his animated videos, which tended to portray at first these blocky, Gumby-esque figures going on spree shootings, killing other Gumby-esque figures and stabbing them. Kind of weird. Nothing so unsettling if you've been online or watched a lot of movies, but kind of weird. As he got better at his craft and devoted more time to it, the animations became more detailed and became a lot more sexual. A lot of weird body horror, torture porn kind of stuff. He had a recurring character named Wrinkles the Clown, which is overtly an homage to John Wayne Gacy's clown Pogo. Not popular, but he had a community of followers who were probably mostly well-adjusted, kind of edgy kids that liked weird art and stuff. But his animation was getting progressively started extreme and, like I said, morphed out from there and got more and more extreme and more malicious. He also would do vlogs. One of his most infamous ones, he talks about wanting to lose his virginity to a sex doll because he, quote, can move over to its ear canal if he gets bored of its bum. Also says he wants a sex doll because he can get one without arms and legs. That's a recurring motif in his films, is wanting a torso, I suppose. The nicest way I can say it. In 2019, Leighton posted a video of himself playing with 3 hamsters that he had bought from a PetSmart. It's a pretty normal video, if you didn't know the guy, but just him playing with these hamsters and talking about them. And the video description read, drowned, pin stabbed, microwaved. People probably knew what was going on, but I've heard some people say that they thought maybe it was a weird joke. The next day, he did post the video of himself graphically mutilating and destroying all of these hamsters. This is 2019, and nobody really reacts, and nobody notices. This infuriates Layton. Well, he continues to make more bizarre animations, including making a live-action video where he, on camera, eats spaghetti out of a clay baby figure, like a life-size baby made of clay, and just mauls spaghetti out of it. He gets like really frustrated that there was no response to him murdering these hamsters. And probably just because he didn't have that big of an audience, and maybe his audience, to be honest, didn't care that much. That's the only thing I can figure. So a year to the day after he posts the video of him killing the hamsters, he goes on a bunch of major like subreddits, horror subreddits and like pet lovers subreddits, and posts the video again. Of course, now millions of people see it. Layton brags on his Twitter that he loves Reddit because you can make people see things they don't want to and, quote, ruin their day. And he eventually ends up arrested and charged for animal cruelty. Gets off on $1,000 bail. He's given, I think, 5 years of supervision. And since then, this is 2021, kind of lays a low profile. By the time his trial's over, I should say it's 2021. And then in 2022, this is, for all intents and purposes, I guess, the end of the story. He lives in Kelowna, I can't say that word. It just doesn't roll off my tongue, right? Toronto. A bunch of mutilated cats are seen around the city, just cats that have been cut clean in half. And this is still happening in this town, Layton's hometown today. Lots of discussion online about how he's probably the one killing these cats, allegedly, by locals. But again, no one's seen or heard from him since then. He's probably just living at home. What's interesting to me in the context of our snuff series is what is snuff and what's the social fear around snuff? That it's this clandestine, secret industry of murder on film for profit. Obviously, Layton didn't murder any humans, but you'll see parallels with some other people that we've spoke about, both privately and on the show. And I think it's interesting. I think in the social media era and in the, the accessibility of just online video creation, you've seen something that is in some ways really similar to the classic idea of snuff, but there's this profound difference in that we always assumed, right, as a society, that snuff is going to be this secret thing, that it's going to be this very underground thing that people are doing for profit. Like that's the place that most people's heads go to when they imagine that. And what we've seen in all these cases is there is very much a type of person who is so willing to just kill on camera because they want other people to see it. But what we've tended to see, I think, and there are more cases like this that we can get into, people aren't doing it, first of all, in secret. It seems like the main reason people do it is because they want to put it online with their faces on it for whatever reason. And secondly, it usually doesn't really have any sort of profit motive. I think that's interesting because while there are similarities to the traditional myth of snuff, this is kind of, to me, even scarier, right? That we've created now this content economy where people, to differentiate themselves on it, are like, oh, I'm going to destroy a living creature, be it human or animal, and I'm going to show everyone that I'm doing it because that's how desperate I am to stand out in like the social media landscape. One of the things when I talk about Zoomer things with this, so Layton's always online. He has a digital footprint going back to like what would have been like early childhood for him. And his family, his parents issued one public statement when he was released on bail in 2021. It's a brief statement where they basically just say, we care about Layton very much and we're sorry to everyone that he is upset. He has severe autism, which has led to him being bullied and led to him, lashing out in unfair ways. I have no idea if that's true, probably, but he never talked about being bullied. He never talked about autism or whatever. One of the things his parents say that's very interesting to me is they spend about half a paragraph saying, we're working really hard to make sure Layton stays off of the internet, that he stays away from those sections of the internet where he got all of these ideas and that were really bad for him. And as far as anyone can tell, I mean, none of the ideas that Layton had, from like weird videos of him violently, molesting a doll, which is a real video he posted, to videos of him, murdering hamsters that he bought from Pet Shop. None of these seem to have anything to do with any sort of online community community. His parents seem to be wanting people to think that maybe he was like, and maybe he was on 4chan or some weird forum. There isn't really any indication of that. Like everything he did was right from his own mind, and it was something he put out there for people. Like he was the person making the fucked up content. So I'm really not sure what corners of the internet his parents assume were influencing him. Very weird kid. I hope that he is under a lot of watch right now, because I wouldn't recommend anyone look out for those videos. You can still find all of his content. His account was terminated, but obviously there's archives of his Instagram, of all of his videos, and I like some pretty fucking gnarly stuff. Fuck, I listen to Gigi Allen and White House and stuff. You know, I've read some Peter Sotos, which is probably the closest thing I could compare Leighton's work to in some ways. Leighton's videos are, and I haven't seen the hamster videos, obviously, but just his art, his animations, some of the most unpleasant things I've ever seen.
No, yeah. I mean, you were talking a little bit about his parents saying that he had like autism or whatever, or that he was massively bullied or whatever, but like he's just a psychopath. That's all it is. Like he is somebody who, if not monitored and imprisoned and punished when he was, and to be fair, he probably still could be, he just would have ended up being a fucking mass murderer or a serial killer. Like that's just the reality. Like doesn't matter how disabled or what exactly his neurosis was. I mean, he's just a fucking psychopath.
And how, people talk about things being ableist. How fucking ableist? How many friends have you had who were probably on the spectrum? How many friends have you had that were like severely bullied, who didn't fucking torture hamsters?
No, absolutely. And even then, like
violent sexual fantasies that they were obsessed with.
Yeah, exactly. And then even then, a lot of autistic people actually generally don't tend to hurt or abuse animals. They actually generally have a much stronger connection to animals than they do people. So that idea to me is just absurd on its face. But, also you mentioned about like 4chan and stuff like that. Like, even though 4chan is a cesspit, like 4chan in general, though, they do not tolerate animal torture and animal cruelty. Like, they have gone after people intensely for that shit. So, like, the idea that he was influenced by 4chan, like, as a possibility of people putting that out there, I think that's patently ridiculous.
I've never seen anyone say 4chan, but I feel like that's sort of what people are indicating when they say he was on forums or image boards or things like 4chan. Like,
no, exactly, yeah. But yeah, definitely a very disturbed young man. And, I think you said Kelowna. I think that's in British Columbia, actually. And if you're in the Vancouver, British Columbia area or whatever, and you see some mutilated cats, try to find where this guy lives, because I wouldn't be surprised if he's the one fucking doing it. Like, let's be real here.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. And he probably, because the cats the people are finding around there, right, they are cut clean in half. Like, they aren't being killed by like a coyote.
Yeah.
And one of the last things that Leighton got really into posting was, so he had a clay figure of himself, like a self-portrait in clay of himself. Towards the end, he began posting on his Instagram instead of like his serial killer clown character doing all these horrible things. And one of the last few things he would post, this is, I think, before the hamster video, was these claymation just stills of the Leighton figure holding a cat that looked like terrified.
And, another common thing about serial killers and especially mass murderers is that oftentimes before they commit their attacks, they love making media portraying them doing horrible shit. Like, That's just the reality. Like, the fucking Columbine kids did it. Like, basically every mass shooter you can think of has some story or some like little movie they made or something or another where they commit like violent acts before they actually do the act. So, no, absolutely. And you know what? Speaking of filming atrocities on film, let's get into our review here of 8mm finally. So, of course, as I was riffing on earlier, this movie is very much hated by critics, but Brian, I think you and I would both agree that the critics are absolutely fucking wrong about this movie. This is a fucking great movie. Like, this is just a absolutely phenomenal movie. I'm just going to get right off the bat by saying, like, this is the movie that is a critically panned Nick Cage movie that never made any sense why it was so critically panned. Like,
I've never understood it. I've loved this movie since I was a kid. I think in my family, my brother and my mom love this movie. It is just good. And this movie is one of the first things that, Taylor, if I remember right, that you and I talked about having a discussion about, I think before we'd even settled on, kind of the format of the podcast, was talking about 8mm, because it gets such a bad rap and it's so good.
Yeah, I remember when we used to do Cage Fight, and Jess, our old host, would organize the movies by Rotten Tomato scores and put them up against, similar movies in the bracket for most of the time because they wanted a fair fight. They didn't want, Pig going up against, I don't know, 211 or something. Like, that's not really a
Sure.
fair fight. And 8mm was always the one in like the bottom quarter of Nick Cage's Rotten Tomato scores. And every time we would get to that point, we were always like, we legitimately don't know why this movie was so critically panned. Like, in every other movie that Nick Cage has, and I'm just going to get it out of the way. So on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 23% critic score and a 52% audience score. And every movie I can think of with Nick Cage that has like a 20 to lower percent Rotten Tomato score is a million times worse than this movie. Like, it's just so baffling to me that a movie like this versus, a movie like fucking 211 or a movie like Trespass or a movie like even Stolen, like a lot of those movies on the same level as this movie's Rotten Tomato score is just, they're not even comparable. Like, it's just crazy to me. Like, and granted, this movie has a lot of things that critics fucking hate. I do understand that. But even then, like, this is still a very competently made movie. This movie has an incredible cast. Like, we're going to get to it when we get there. But this movie is a big budget, A-list exploitation movie. And for whatever reason, critics fucking hated it. And like I said, we just do not understand why. It makes no sense.
And it also seems though, like, I don't feel like that many people, like audiences haven't really seen this movie, it seems like. I don't even know if people know what it is.
Yeah, actually, and also just to get this one out of the way real quick. So it had a budget of $40 million and it grossed 96.6. So, not a box office bomb by any stretch of the imagination, but it was definitely not the like commercial, blockbuster that the studios wanted from this movie, obviously. Like, they probably wanted this movie to make like, I don't know, 250 million or whatever. And it's like, it's a Nick Cage movie about a snuff film. Like, it wasn't going to make that much fucking money. Let's be real here.
Watching 8mm this week, I do have sort of a notion of why critics might not have liked it. I disagree with it, but I have kind of an idea. And I think that all comes back to Joel Schumacher's kind of aesthetic style and his construction and what people don't like about Schumacher, sometimes fairly and sometimes unfairly.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And actually, once we get to that point in the details, I really want to go over your point, but just real quick here. So once again, we're talking about 8mm, came out in 1999. It was rated R, and I think I was reading on the trivia, there had to be 5 or 6 different entries for various things that had to be cut for the MPAA to give it an R rating, because there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of nudity in this movie. There's a lot of very frank depictions of sex and actual like porn films being shown in this movie. So the fact that it ever got an R rating in the first place is actually kind of impressive to me, because man.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you were mentioning it was directed by Joel Schumacher, although originally David Fincher was supposed to direct, which isn't very surprising because this movie was written by Andrew Kevin Walker, who also wrote Seven, and he also wrote other movies such as The Hideaway, Event Horizon, the other David Fincher movie, The Game, which I don't know if you agree with this, Brian, but I think that's David Fincher's most underrated movie. I fucking love The Game. That's such a good movie.
I have not seen The Game. It's one of the only major Fincher works I haven't seen. I know.
Are you serious? Oh my God. We have.
Yeah.
In all honesty, I did not realize that. I'm going to put that on the list because The Game is fucking incredible. I'm dead serious.
I'm down. I love Fincher.
I would say it's at least a top 5 David Fincher movie. I think it's fucking great. And of course, he was also involved in writing Fight Club, of course, this movie, Sleepy Hollow, a 2010 movie called The Wolfman, which apparently was a big budget movie that flopped pretty hard. Yeah. He also wrote the newest David Fincher movie, The Killer, and he also wrote the Tales from the Crypt episode, Well Cooked Hams, and the David Fincher anthology series, Love, Death, and Robots episode, Bad Traveling. So he's been involved in a lot of David Fincher and David Fincher adjacent projects. So, definitely somebody who would have been a very wise choice to listen entirely to his advice with this movie. But unfortunately, Joel Schumacher listened to the studios and very much toned down Andrew Kevin Walker's original idea for this movie. Now, granted, I still like the studio and Joel Schumacher's version of this film, but I would have liked to see Andrew Kevin Walker's unedited version of the script of this movie, if I'm being honest with you.
I would too. I've listened to, not recently, I don't have the DVD anymore, but back in the day, I listened to Schumacher's commentary on this DVD a lot. I find it interesting that Fincher was attached, but I am glad Schumacher ended up directing. They both have really distinct styles that I would say I'm a fan of. I think if you take Schumacher away from this movie, even if you keep all the other core elements the same, it's a very different movie.
Oh yes, very much so. Joel Schumacher very, very much brings his directorial and like aesthetic style to this movie a lot.
Yeah, which can be a make or break thing. I think he is definitely a director with a style that I think a lot of people don't like.
Oh God, yes. And then speaking of, so this movie was also produced by Joel Schumacher and two other individuals by the name of Gavin Polone and Judy Hoffland. Now, as we were talking about Joel Schumacher, he's most well known for either writing, directing, or producing such movies as The Wiz, the 1970s movie. I think he wrote the screenplay for that one.
Yeah,
He
great
wrote.
movie.
Oh yeah, I've heard that, but every time people talk about it, it's like, oh yeah, that's a movie with Diana Ross and Michael Jackson, right?
Yes,
Adaptation
I
of
love
The
it.
Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, I love it.
He also directed, of course, such movies as St. Elmo's Fire, The Lost Boys, Cousins. That's not related to the Wisconsin-based sub sandwich chain, but a totally different thing. He also directed a movie called The Client, of course, Falling Down, as we reviewed on the podcast, my first podcast, Dick Trolls, and we did not have very many positive things to say about that movie at the time.
I've got some complicated thoughts about Falling Down. I like
It is
that movie.
it is a very complicated movie. That is a movie you either love or hate. And I'll be honest, if you love Falling Down, you're probably a future mass shooter.
I got stuff to say about that movie, but yeah, that movie is fucking weird. St. Elmo's Fire, one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
That's the thing. We keep talking about how, like, he's a very make or break director. Like, he's made some of my favorite movies I've reviewed for shows, but he's also seen some of my least favorite movies I've reviewed for shows. Like, he's such a make or break, hit or miss kind of guy. Like, when he hits, he hits. But when he misses, holy fuck, does he miss?
Yeah. Yeah.
He, of course, also directed Batman Forever and the infamous Batman and Robin. He also directed A Time to Kill, maybe the most pro-death penalty movie of all time. He, of course, directed this movie, Phone Booth, which is a movie we talked about in the podcast. And I promise you, Brian, I will absolutely see that movie very soon because I'm very interested in it. And he also directed The Phantom of the Opera, 2000s movie, The Number 23, and his very last directorial film was another Nick Cage movie, actually, called Trespass, which I believe to this date is his least critically acclaimed movie. That movie is fucking awful. Like, legitimately, one of the worst movies we saw for Cage Fight. It is so goddamn terrible.
That is too bad. Yeah, and you've got shit like that. You've got fucking Batman and Robin, St. Elmo's Fire. On the other hand, though, like, he did Lost Boys.
Yeah, God, Jesus Christ. Just a guy who, like I said, he either made incredible movies that everybody, like, fucking talks about or was influenced by, or the biggest pieces of shit ever. Like, it's hilarious. Like, what other director has that?
Yeah, no, I mean, Schumacher, I think that because people are harsher on failures than they are generous to successes, he generally gets thought of as a bad director. And then when you look at his body of work, if you showed it to most people, they'd go, oh yeah, he did probably as much stuff that I like as stuff that I don't. But people are, people remember the flops more when they hear his name.
No, absolutely. And, speaking of potential flops, so Gavin Polone is most famous for producing such movies and TV shows as, of course, this film, Panic Room, Secret Window, Population 436, which is not really a notable film for the vast majority of people, but I wanted to include that movie because it is, I believe, to this date, the only movie where Fred Durst has a starring role in it. And we actually did review it for Cage Fight when we did our Fred Durst bracket. And I can tell you what, he's not a bad actor.
That's not the movie he, wrote and directed, is it?
No, he wrote and directed two movies. One of them being, oh God, what the fuck is it called? The Secret Life of Cody Banks or something like that. Oh, the Education.
Banks?
No, it's The Education of fucking Cody something.
Okay, I was like, did he write and direct the Cody Banks movie?
That would be so goddamn funny. But no, God, like I said, he directed some fucking movie. It's The Education of something, and I can't remember.
But it's like a drama, right? It's like kind of like a really kind of a gritty. Didn't he direct some movie that's like a low budget drama about an aspiring writer who's addicted to heroin or something?
No, so the movie The Education of Charlie Banks, that's what the fuck it's called. I knew it was something Banks, not Cody Banks. That would be hilarious. But no, that movie it's basically a modern day adaptation of The Great Gatsby and like some other various like Dickensian sort of, or not Dickensian. I'm trying to think of maybe Dickensian too, but Oscar Wilde. It's like an adaptation of like an Oscar Wilde story on top of it too. And it's got fucking Jesse Eisenberg in one of his early roles. And he basically is just a guy who gets involved with rich people, and then there's like this fucking dropout guy who just makes everybody's life worse. And it's actually like a very good movie, believe it or not. Like, it's actually a surprisingly good film.
I am intrigued.
And then he also directed one of the worst movies of all time, but genuinely a movie I fucking love. I've seen this movie like 4 times, and I think it's The Room level intriguing. The Fanatic, of course. I don't know, Brian, have you seen The Fanatic?
No.
Oh my motherfucking God. Honestly, whenever you get a chance, ASAP, you have to watch The Fanatic. That movie is incredible. Imagine this. John Travolta, in at that point, his final role ever. I think he finally came back to acting, but this was the role he took before he took like an indefinite hiatus at the time, where he plays an autistic fucking stalker who just like goes after the guy who played Stan in the Eminem Stan music video. And it just turns into like a journey into hell. Like, it's incredible.
This sounds insane. This sounds like absolute madness.
It is so funny. It is legitimately a movie that every time I watch it, I laugh.
And Fred wrote and directed this?
Yes, he wrote the screenplay and directed it.
Okay, maybe I have to watch that soon.
There is a scene in the movie where, once again, the guy who played Stan in the Eminem music video, like, rides along in a car with his daughter as, like, they're going home, and they listen to the unquestionable truth, and he's like, yeah, this shit slaps.
No fucking way.
I'm dead serious. That actually happened.
Awesome. You gotta respect the hustle, you know?
So yeah, 100%. I'll put The Fanatic on the list too, because The Fanatic is so much goddamn fun. That's a fucking hilarious movie.
Oh, these movies are gonna give me like an aneurysm.
Yeah. But so Gavin Polone also produced the Zombieland franchise, and he also has been a producer on Curb Your Enthusiasm and Gilmore Girls. So somebody who's been involved in a lot of different projects. And then Judy Hoffman is most well known for producing, obviously, this film as well, Panic Room, and the Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, and Haunting in Venice, which is all part of this like weird series of movies Kenneth Branagh directed or starred in. It's like the Poirot, the French detective stories, or like the modern.
Yeah, Hercule Poirot.
Yep, that's it. So for whatever reason, she was involved in producing all those movies. But so, like I said, that's what she's involved in. And once again, this movie is a fairly long movie, but it's about 123 minutes long. And of course, I went over the budget and the critic scores from earlier. So yeah, those are all the details of this movie. So with that out of the way, let's get into our little synopsis here. So I believe, as we mentioned earlier before we started recording, this is a movie that has a fairly tight plot. I mean, a lot happens in this movie, but the plot is fairly straightforward, at least for the kind of movie that it wants to be. Would you agree with that, Brian?
Yeah, a lot happens, but it's more about it taking its time with setting and kind of building tension and atmosphere. There's a lot of atmosphere. There's a lot of a feeling of like descent into a netherworld in this movie, but the actual plot, the things that happen on paper are pretty tight, I would say.
I would agree. And just to get this out of the way real quick, as I think we mentioned on the Hardcore episode, a lot of people consider this movie to be a ripoff of Hardcore, and neither of us really agree with that. There are some similar plot beats, but I would not say this is a ripoff of Hardcore at all. It's more of an homage to Hardcore, not a ripoff, I would say.
Yeah, it's an homage. And I mean, these similarities are very apparent, like they're noticeable, but they're also few. And they're basically that they're both neo-noirs about a descent into like underground pornography. But as far as their specifics and even their themes and the way they treat porn, I would say they're pretty different. Right off the bat, since we're in the synopsis, the characterization of our protagonists is completely different, at least to my thinking. George C. Scott in Hardcore, we're given a lot of time to be established with his character. He's a Calvinist. He's this very upright Michigan Christian guy who's very upper middle class, maybe more. He's a successful regional businessman. And we know all this, and then he's kind of thrust into this dark world. This movie, right off the bat, basically, it lets us know that Nick Cage is a PI very quickly, very efficiently. And then it basically goes, oh, now he's going to get this case, and he's pushed into it. But Nick Cage doesn't really have much in common with George C. Scott in Hardcore right off the bat.
No, in fact, honestly, he's actually more like Masked.
Yeah.
He's more like Masked or Peter Boyle.
He's kinder than Masked. Like, obviously, like, Masked is like a piece of shit, like a bad guy in the context of Hardcore. But he's, our protagonist in 8mm is a private eye who has kind of, I guess, a sleazy job. We're supposed to read into that, but it's to support a family, and, he does it, and he's good at it. It's sort of very right off the bat said, like, oh, he's a PI, but he's pretty ethical. It's sort of indicated that ethics are important to him, but he's not really like our hardcore our hardcore pornographer, our hardcore protagonist, he's kind of presented, at least to my way of thinking, and there are no politics in this movie, really, except for, later on you could really read some, but I would kind of perceive this character as just sort of like a liberal guy who just happens to be a private eye. He's just kind of like, whatever.
He's a base lib going after the sickos.
Oh my God. Imagine Nick Cage in the Billy Jack reboot, right?
God.
Nick Cage in red face.
I mean, he's been everything else. Why not be a new race? But yeah, so let's get into the synopsis here. So once again, as you mentioned, private investigator Tom Wells, played by the actor Nick Cage. And one of the trivia facts I had here is all these people were originally considered for the role. Russell Crowe, which was the person who was actually originally supposed to play this movie 100%. So the trivia within the trivia for this fact here. So Russell Crowe was the original actor assigned to this role, and they were going to go forward with it. But at the time, of course, Nicolas Cage was a much bigger actor than Russell Crowe. And the studio said, if we can get Nick Cage on this, we can get a much bigger budget and much more funding. So they decided to go with Nick Cage instead of Russell Crowe, which I personally think was a better move because I don't dislike Russell Crowe as an actor, but I just don't think he carried this role nearly as well as Nick Cage could. You know what I mean?
I think this is like to me, this is a perfect vehicle for Cage. There's something about, maybe it's just because he's a weird, kind of monotone, kind of robotic feeling guy. There's a type of character who he can really inhabit, which is like, how would I describe it? Like a cool guy with autism, like an autistic greaser. But like you watch 8mm, you watch Wild at Heart, you watch pretty much any movie, I would say, where I think Nick Cage is really good in, especially one where he's like a protagonist. And that's kind of the vibe, right? Is like autistic greaser. Say he brings that to this.
And then speaking of other people who could have played an autistic greaser, so other people that were considered for the role were Val Kilmer, Charlie Sheen, which I really want to get into in a moment, John Travolta, Mel Gibson, and Nick Nolte. Now, I think Charlie Sheen would have been perfect for this role because, Brian, I think you and I would both agree that Charlie Sheen knows a lot about the seedy world of illegal pornography and how to authenticate snuff film.
Yeah, he's a pro.
And to the audience at home, aka the one person who listens to this podcast, so context for that. So Charlie Sheen was married to Denise Richards. Was that her name? I think it was Denise Richards.
Yes.
Yes. So he was married to Denise Richards, and Denise Richards claims that at one point when she was either pregnant or just had her child, she begged Charlie Sheen to stop watching CP. And she was like crying through tears, and Charlie Sheen told her to shut the fuck up.
Don't you hate when your wife is nagging you and you're just, we all got our thing. We all got to unwind once in a while. And of course, the wife is always on my balls. She's like, man, stop watching child porn. It's like, come on, bitch, chill the fuck out. I work hard.
And then the
what
authentic
a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah, he's such a
allegedly.
Fucking bad person. Well, to be fair, also, I think it was Corey Feldman said that Charlie Sheen raped Corey Haim when he was 14. So there's quite a few allegations against Charlie Sheen. And then the authenticate snuff film aspect. So there's a story, and this is on like the Wikipedia article for this movie, but there is a very infamous series of Japanese fake snuff films called the Guinea Pig movies. And I think it's either the second or third in the series. I actually have a Blu-ray rip of all the movies.
I think it's Flower of Flesh and Blood, I think is the one that had.
It's Flower of Flesh and Blood, and he watched it, and he apparently called the FBI saying that he had found a real snuff film and they should look into it.
Well, Taylor, look, he was watching the film and he thought to himself, boy, I have seen the look of fear in a lot of women's eyes. I am pretty sure I can recognize the look of a woman terrified that she may be about to die.
And I'm sorry, as somebody who has now seen all the Guinea Pig movies, it looks fake as shit. There is no way.
I'm not saying like those are nice movies, but those are like genre movies. That is like extreme horror. But it's like, it doesn't look like real. It doesn't.
No. I bet she was probably just so blitzed out of his mind that he's just like, oh shit, I just watched a real murder.
Yeah, he's fucking gacked out and he's a fucking moron.
A moron, a predator, just the worst person of all time. Didn't he give AIDS to like an actual person on purpose? Like he's such an awful person.
I don't doubt it, allegedly. So I want to say, having you run through all these, and I love Nick Cage in this, is probably my favorite. No, Wild at Heart's my favorite Nick Cage film, easily. But after that, it's probably 8mm. Pretty much all of those names that you went through, including Charlie Sheen, I could see being good in this role, but they'd all be very different.
They would all be 100% different. Like, absolutely.
Mel Gibson in this film, be a different film, but he's a piece of shit too. We don't, we need to relitigate it, but I think he'd be good in this.
Yeah, I wouldn't say personally on the same level as Charlie Sheen, but he's pretty close to being a big piece of shit like Charlie Sheen.
I mean, we don't have to compare. They're different
Oh, no.
kinds of piece of shit. What else? A Baldwin, and I'm not making a joke here. Any of the Baldwins probably could have been in this. There's a type of guy who was a big actor in the 90s who this movie was kind of made for. But I'm so glad it was Cage because he's got such a weird energy, as you know, Taylor. Perfectly suited to Joel Schumacher, I think.
Absolutely. God. Well, actually, he was not well suited to Joel Schumacher in Trespass, unfortunately.
I know. That's what I was thinking when you said that was really bad. I was like, because maybe there will be more room to talk about. I think part of the thing with Schumacher, and maybe part of the reason some people don't get this movie, is because he has a really strong sense of camp. And I think that was not very in the 90s. And then that sense of camp that runs strong in 8mm, even though it's a very dark film. And I kind of think that maybe people didn't pick up on the campiness. They just thought it was being a stupid movie.
Yes, and especially once we get to that point, I really want to talk about the camp because there is some just great camp moments. Like, seriously, there's so many great camp moments in this fucking movie. But yeah, so once again, Tom Wells is contacted by Daniel Longdale, played by the actor Anthony Heald, an attorney working for wealthy widow Mrs. Christian, played by the actress Myra Carter. While clearing out her late husband's safe, she and Longdale found an 8mm movie which appears to depict a real murder of a girl, but Mrs. Christian wants to know for certain. Wells is instructed by Longdale and Mrs. Christian not to reproduce the film and to keep the investigation secret. Now, the first scene in this movie that is definitely an homage to Hardcore is the scene where Nick Cage watches the snuff film, because it's very similar to that scene where in Hardcore, Van Dorn watches the film of his daughter, getting railed. It's very similar. Like, you just hear, for the most part, just the clicking of the film reel and just the grimaced faces. Of course, in Hardcore, it's just seeing his daughter have sex, which, I mean, if as a father, I wouldn't want to see that either. But in this movie, it's a child getting murdered. So the visceral reaction on Nick Cage's face, I think, is maybe a little bit even more horrifying. I should say not a little bit. Is definitely a lot more horrifying to audiences than in what was shown in Hardcore.
I guess what's really interesting to me about Nick Cage's performance here, and this scene sets it all up, is the whole idea, right, is that Wells is he's like a consummate professional private eye. Like, knows his stuff. He kind of keeps his emotions very in line. And right out the gate, he's introduced to this case, and he's shaken by it. He's disturbed. He's made to feel a way that he probably doesn't want to be feeling. And he's trying right away, when he steps out of that room after watching the film, to maintain his professional demeanor, because that's how he does his job. And you see that conflict in that character throughout the movie, right, which I think is really good. It's a really good performance on Cage's part.
No, absolutely. And just like in Hardcore, obviously, and you just, once again, you see, in Van Dorn's anguished face in Hardcore, and you see Nick Cage's fucking anguished face just watching. And of course, Nick Cage is always a great actor, but you just see, his anguished expression seeing this fucking film of a little girl being murdered that nobody necessarily knows at the time is real or fake, but he's just like, oh God, if that's fake, I don't fucking want to know. He's sweating and shit. It's very visceral.
He looks like he is choking down vomit.
Yeah, exactly.
He looks like he's about to throw up.
But yeah, so of course, Mrs. Christian gets Nick Cage's services here. After looking through missing persons files, Wells discovers the girl is a young girl named Mary Ann Matthews, and she was played by the actress Jenny Powell, who in real life was a stripper that was originally a stand-in, just like in Hardcore, where Van Dorn's daughter in real life was a stripper who was just a stand-in. So I thought that was another very interesting connection. I don't think that was done on purpose, but I think that's a very interesting connection.
Just the way it works out. You need a certain type of girl to be murdered in a film.
Exactly. At least Joel Schumacher didn't say she was ugly.
No shit. I still can't get over what a rude thing to say about that woman.
Yeah, seriously, right. And then Tom Wells visits her mother, Janet, played by the actress Amy Morton, in North Carolina. She allows Wells to search her house and finds Mary Ann's diary, which is in, the back of the toilet for some reason after, and we learn later in the movie she's been missing for 6 or 7 years, but,
yeah, I made a note of that. I was like, this journal looks like it's been in that toilet tank for maybe 3 days.
Yeah, exactly, right? But, hey, whatever.
Yeah.
And then we learn in the diary she went to Hollywood to become a movie star. And Mrs. Matthews wants to know what happened to her daughter. Now, I also love the scene where he goes to North Carolina and he meets Mrs. Marianne Matthews, Marianne Matthews' mom, Janet. I'll just call her Janet. And he goes up to her, he fakes that he's part of the FBI. Like every time he meets a new person trying to find leads, he always lies and tells some fucking story. And he's talking about how he's a consummate professional. He never stutters. He knows exactly what the fuck he's going to say. He always knows exactly which way to go. He does a cold reading on Janet when he meets her at her job at the grocery store. And he's like, oh yeah, FBI agent. She goes like, oh, whatever his name is. Like, yep, exactly. And that's like a thing that people do forever. It's a way to get pretty like common information out of people is do cold reading. Like you say like, oh, it starts with an F or, he's like this or that. So I thought that was very interesting. And then also in the scene where Nick Cage is doing some research, he meets a very young Norman Reedus, which I thought was really funny. Mm-hmm. And I also love in that scene, so Norman Reedus' character was like her old boyfriend or whatever, and he went to Hollywood. He didn't make it, so he went back to North Carolina, got in some petty crime bullshit. He's basically just like a fucking burnout in this small town or whatever. And at one point he has a line, it's like, hey, listen, I went out to Hollywood to be in movies, and look at me now. And it's just hilarious. Like, I think they did that one on purpose.
Yeah, they did.
And of course, as we know, now Norman Reedus is like a big name in Hollywood, but at the time he was just like a bit actor who wasn't necessarily in anything big at the time. But it was very funny to see like a baby Norman Reedus in this fucking movie.
Saying like, I didn't make it.
Yeah. So Tom goes to Hollywood, which I also love him going to Hollywood, which is also, of course, very similar to when Jake Van Dorn goes to Los Angeles in Hardcore. But like the soundtrack for both these movies are, I'm going to say kindly very different. So I really love like the synth score as he's just going through like the seedy underbelly of Los Angeles and Hardcore. I think it's very effective. In this movie, for whatever reason, 80% of the movie is Arabic chanting and wailing. It makes no sense. Like a baffling choice.
It's so stupid. It's the only thing about this movie that when I watch it, I think that's so stupid. And I think that the idea was he's journeying to an exotic, mysterious world, the world of porn. And it needs an exotic, mysterious score.
And Brian?
Middle Eastern world music.
When I think of people going to Skid Row to find possibly missing teenage girls who are involved in snuff movies, I think of Arabic music.
Distracting.
It is so jarring and distracting. Like when I remember rewatching this movie for the first time, just for the review for this. I mean, I've seen this movie like 3 or 4 times otherwise, but just watching it again, I'm like, what the fuck is this? Because I'd totally forgotten about it. But anyways, so he makes his way to Hollywood, California, and he meets adult video store employee Max California, played by Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah, once again, we got Nick Cage, we got Norman Reedus, we got Joaquin Phoenix already, and that's not the only other big names in this movie. In a movie that once again has a 23% on Rotten Tomatoes. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
like, just bizarre. A guy who a year later would be in a 6-time Academy Award-winning movie as a co-star. Like, what the fuck?
I'm pretty sure his performance in this gets especially ragged on.
Which is bizarre because he's good in the movie. I don't even think he's bad.
So I think it's another thing where there is a sense of humor to this movie. And it's good. It works well. It doesn't take away from the movie because this is a genre film. It's a dark genre film. But like there's room for like a certain type of gallows humor in it. But I sort of think sometimes that's lost on people. And a lot of that humor comes from Joaquin Phoenix in this film.
Yeah, he's got so many just incredibly memorable lines in this movie. And obviously you said he was sort of like dogged on for being in this role or whatever. But do you think that's maybe just because like literally the next year he was in this like, extremely critically acclaimed movie? Like you think that's maybe why?
Absolutely, I think so. So people look at this movie that first of all did not do great and got critically panned, and they go like, can you believe that's Joaquin Phoenix? But he's good in this.
Yeah, especially for the role he's trying to play. He does a fucking great job. Like, let's be real.
He's like a snarky, like punk rock guy. He's a very cartoonish character. Like, I do think this movie is very heightened, to put it
mildly. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, he's playing like kind of a cartoon of like a burnout Gen X guy.
Yeah, who was in a band that didn't work out, and he just decides to do like a dead-end job in the meantime until he finds like what he thinks is going to be his next big break or whatever. Like, yeah.
A band called Hard Spank.
Oh, hard spank. Yep, that's it. That's
Now,
it.
anyone that knows me knows that I would 100% listen to a band called Hard Spank.
Yeah, right. And then, we're talking about other casting choices. So, and this is the one that I think you and I would both agree would have been a just complete dog shit choice. But the next trivia fact I have here is Mark Wahlberg turned down the role as Max California, and Mark Wahlberg would have been horrendous in this movie.
Oh my God.
Would have
Bad.
been
Bad.
awful.
Hey, yo, I don't use it. I don't endorse it. I just lead the way.
Oh, yeah. And, I remember that line specifically. And it's like, that's literally the same line, essentially, as what fucking Math says, where it's like, yep, no one makes it. No one produces it. Nobody watches it.
Yes, it is. Let's do more Wahlberg doing that. Dance with the devil. Devil don't change.
Yo, man.
Devil changes you.
Yo, man, I'll tell you what. If I was in the room when they were making that porn movie, it wouldn't have went down like that. That girl wouldn't have been murdered. It wouldn't have went down like that.
It wouldn't have went down like that. Yeah. Fucking, that's the coolest thing Mark ever said.
God, I still imagine Seth MacFarlane and fucking Mark Wahlberg on that flight just chilling out, being like, oh, I remember you. Like, hell yeah, dude, I love Family Guy. And then the 3 seconds later, Muhammad Atta comes out. Ah, Jesus Christ. But anyway,
what could have been?
Yeah, what could have been, man. But yeah, so Wells delves into the world of underground fetish pornography. He attempts to find out if snuff films are real by literally just asking people, can I get snuff?
So dumb.
And at one point he has Max do it too, which I think is even more baffling because like this guy knows these people.
You'd think Max would be like, hey, you got to kind of read the room. Because I think that this film is good. I think most of the stuff that people dog on it for is fine because it's a movie. Max and Wells should both be a little more savvy than this. Because even when you're asking for like fetish porn that isn't extremely illegal, you might still speak in kind of a coded language, you know?
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, I mean, just for, people's, fucking professional reputation, like these people peddling this illegal smut aren't just going to be like, hey, can you find me like, shit enema fucking cum porn or whatever? And he's like, we don't deal with that. We deal with this. It's just like any other fucking sales tactic. Like, you can't just be like, hey, you have films of girls being murdered? Like, what the fuck? That's such cop behavior. And they even mentioned like Nick Cage looks and acts like a fucking cop.
The first time they ask for snuff, I think it is when he has Max ask him, they're at like an underground swap meet in a house where the like salesmen have like rifles and shit.
And they don't speak English either on top of it.
Yeah.
And then, later on, of course, they go to another underground swap meet where they find like actual illegal pornography. And there's like just a booth at one of them that just says kids on it. And like he picks it up, looks at it, and then he like wipes his hands on his jacket, which God, one of the stipulations for Russell Crowe apparently was he wanted that scene to happen, but then he takes like one of the pictures and throws it in the garbage and lights it on fire. And I'm like, yeah, that's just kind of stupid. Like I'm just going to be real.
Fucking Russell Crowe sound like a fucking one of those Facebook guys that's like, oh boy, if you hurt my friends, I'll kick your ass. But you know what? I'm the nicest guy in the world, but if you make me cry, that's when you're really in trouble. So Schumacher says, I don't know why he feels the need to say this in the DVD commentary back in the day. When it gets to that scene, he really emphatically was like, I never, ever, ever had CP on the set. I never, ever let it get anywhere near. And it's like, yeah, I didn't assume you did, Schumacher.
Yeah. Doth protest too much.
Like, it's just, I don't think that's the case. That's what it is, but it is weird, right? It's like, well, yeah, I understand that it's a movie. Like,
yeah, no. Well, then speaking of things that are just movies, so eventually they do find a quote-unquote real snuff movie, and they watch it at fucking Max's apartment. He's like, oh, I think this is Filipinos, and then he takes off his pants, and you like kind of see his dick and ass. It's like, yep, definitely the Filipinos.
Max can recognize from the dick. He's like, yeah, that is a Philippine dish.
And then, of course, they're like, oh, yeah, that's not real, because it was the same girl in like 2 movies or whatever, and it's like, yeah, whatever.
That's cute. That's a good bit.
But yeah, so Wells finds no evidence that a snuff film industry exists on this market. He eventually contacts with talent scout Eddie Poole, played by James fucking Gandolfini. Once again, Joaquin Phoenix, Nick Cage, James Gandolfini, Norman Reedus, in a movie that has 23% on Rotten Tomatoes. Just insane. Yeah.
And again, it's because my theory about the
also this movie came out the year that The Sopranos aired.
Yeah, part of it I was thinking when I was watching 8mm this week is we've talked about Nick Cage's method. How if he's not guided, he'll just go bigger. Does it seem like Gandolfini's going real big in this?
Oh, yeah, no, honestly, when we get to the final scenes with James Gandolfini, he's fucking great in this movie. He's so
like
good.
A cartoon of a porn peddler.
Yeah, it's so, especially the last few scenes with James Gandolfini are just so camp, just so ridiculous. They're hilarious. I love it. They're so good.
He's taking up some big swings.
Yeah. But yeah, so eventually he finds James Gandolfini's character, and he also finds Dino Velvet through some snooping of James Gandolfini and like wiretapping his phone and stuff. Played by the actor Peter Stormare, which, along with, I believe, John Cusack, is Nick Cage's most frequent collaborator. They've each been in like 4 movies of Nick Cage's each, so I think that's very interesting.
That makes sense.
And originally, some people considered for the role of Dino Velvet would have been Eric Roberts, Tommy Lee Jones, Charles Dance, James Woods, Willem Dafoe, and Rutger Hauer. Now, obviously,
Willem Dafoe as Dino would have been incredible.
Would have been absolutely incredible. Like, I mean, James Woods also would have been great, but in a completely different way. I would have loved James Woods. I would have loved him to look exactly like Peter Stormare's character, but just James Woods. That would have been fucking hilarious. Have you seen Vampires? The John Carpenter movie Vampires?
Yes, I have. Yes,
oh my God. Imagine James Woods' like portrayal in Vampires, but as Dino Velvet. That would have been awesome.
Oh my God, incredible.
But yeah,
Dino is awesome because he's like a Batman villain.
Oh my God, he chews the scenery in every scene he's in. Peter Stormare, like, even though I don't think Peter Stormare is the best actor, his accents are just dog shit. That guy can't do an accent to save his fucking life. Like, seriously, he just does his like Swedish American accent in every role I've ever seen him in. He is horrendous with accents, but still, he does a fucking great job in this movie. He's just this slimy, like, pretentious auteur guy who is like a porn producer who's like, I make art. And of course, all he does,
I make la art.
I make la art. Even though he doesn't really sound like that at all. But yeah, he is just absolutely hilarious in this movie. But yeah, so he is a director of violent pornography. Velvet's films often feature, quote unquote, machine, a masked man who brutalizes and tortures women, and resembles the man who appeared in Christian snuff film. To gain more evidence, Wells pretends to be a client interested in commissioning a hardcore BDSM film to be directed by Velvet and starring Machine. Velvet agrees and arranges a meeting in New York City. Now,
can we talk a little bit about the snippets we see of Dino's films? Because
I have some things to say.
So, Dino Velvet's films, and we only see a few seconds of like the beginning of one. It says, "Welcome to the world of Dino Velvet." There's this logo, which is like a spider and then a DV. And then it fades to this. I'm going to say, I don't want to overshare here. I've seen some avant-garde porn. I've been involved with people who had an interest in like kind of like artsy, weird porn and stuff. So I've seen some of it. And this is pretty tame. I realize we're only seeing a few seconds. It's like a joke of that. It's like what that would look like to someone who's never seen it. You see like a lady with like rubber tits on for a second, and then it cuts to like a cat hissing. It's like,
I will say though, Brian, I think that Dino's films, and like you said, the spider especially, I think actually might be based on a real porn company that existed in the late 90s, early 2000s called
I'm sure they are.
It's called Insects, and the logo is a spider, and it was like very hardcore, like bondage, like BDSM pornography. And I believe at one point the FBI specifically went after this guy who made these movies. So I think that Dino's films were like kind of based off of that specifically. Although
I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're the specific thing of, and if this isn't a real like experimental porn film or whatever, that's a thing where there's like acts of bondage and then it cuts to like a cat hissing and a dog barking. That's so funny if that isn't a legit like, because there's like something to be said about like whatever types of like fetish film or whatever that use like abstract imagery or things. There's a whole genre that's like pink cinema in Japan and things, and there's some sleaze and some trash there, but there's some real cinema, for lack of a better word, buried in that. But if there is just a thing where it's like, oh, here's a lady getting whipped and then a cat goes, "Tear!" Like that's so fucking funny to me.
So yes, after Velvet agrees and arranges a meeting in New York City with Tom, the meeting turns out to be an ambush. Now, we didn't mention it earlier, but Tom and Max California both, they, of course, as we mentioned earlier, they go throughout this seedy world of like underground illegal pornography in like Los Angeles and stuff like that. They make their way to New York City, and that's where they set up the potential porn film with Dino. And just before they do the meeting, Max gets sent away by Nick Cage, and he's just like, wait, I thought we were like a team or whatever. Is like, no, you're in way over your head. If I have some other like issues on the West Coast, I'll contact you or whatever. It's like, oh man, I thought we were gonna be fucking friends. I thought we were gonna be like teammates or whatever. And like, we were talking earlier about a lot of people really dog on Joaquin Phoenix for his portrayal, but like he actually has a fucking character arc in this fucking movie. He's a very interesting character, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So the thing with this arc is that, and I wonder if this is part of what people miss about Joaquin's character, there is like a naivete to him. It's not just that he's like, I think people think it's supposed to be, oh, he's a cool, edgy punk rock porn guy. And it is that, but it's also kind of that he's like still a kid. Like he's still kind of finding himself and he doesn't know if this music thing is going to happen. And so he's got this kind of shitty job, but it kind of probably lets him dick around and be a little edgy or whatever. So he does that, But he's kind of hoping, I think, he's like, oh, I've made this connection with this private eye and I'm able to help him with this. And maybe he kind of feels like he's doing something a little more meaningful. And he's like, maybe this character wouldn't stick with it. Maybe, he'd do it for a little bit, but like, I don't want to be like this private eye assistant or whatever. But he's just kind of excited to have something else going on because his life feels so hollow. It's kind of how that reads.
No, absolutely. And like you
to
can
have
tell
like a friend who's not some weird porn addict.
Yeah. And like exactly, you can tell he's like genuinely like, oh shit, I'm actually doing something. And then Nick Cage is like, yeah, fuck off. If I need your help later, I'll contact you. And he's like, God damn it. But yeah, so once again, the next day, the meeting turns out to be an ambush. Longdale and Poole appear and hold Wells at gunpoint. The film turns out to be real. And of course, we already know that earlier in the movie, but it's now confirmed to be real. And so the setup apparently is that Mr. Christian contacted Longdale to procure a snuff film. And being unable to find one, Longdale commissioned Velvet and Poole to make one. And I also love the setup. So like they go to like some random warehouse in New York City. Dino just has like a fucking crossbow and is shooting a like fucking crucifix with the crossbow, and there's like just like stockade setups for like bondage stuff. And then of course you see Machine in the corner and he's like, oh fuck, Machine's here. So, and I should also clarify that Tom wanted Dino to bring Machine on the set as one of his stipulations for making this fake movie that he was trying to set up here. So that's why Machine shows up.
Again, total Batman villain vibes from Dino. It's so crazy.
It is, exactly. And then Longdale goes to, like, takes Nick Cage by gunpoint out to his car to procure the snuff film because they're going to destroy it. And then Nick Cage is like, why? Why'd you do it? Did you get hard watching it? Did you help him jerk off while watching it? Like, why'd you watch
Did you suck his pee-pee?
Yeah. Why'd you want to make a film about a little girl being butchered? And then...
He's Nick Caging out.
He really is. And I genuinely love Longdale's response where he's like, why? You want to know why? Because he could. Which is genuinely a great fucking response because, like, so we didn't really get into Mr. Christian, but he's apparently like this business magnate. He's worth like probably just untold millions upon millions of dollars. And he was like a philanthropist type guy in the community or whatever. And like, if you have everything and you're like just a psychopathic piece of shit who doesn't value anybody else, then having that kind of money essentially kind of turns you into a psychopath. There's like a lot of studies
Epstein.
On that. Exactly. And like, once you have
Vince
everything.
McMahon.
Yeah. But yeah, once you have everything, why not get away with, fucking essentially impunity, the most depraved thing that most normal people can imagine. Like, as we even mentioned on the hardcore episode, like, of course that movie deals with, kiddie porn, child molestation, child sex abuse material, whatever you want to call it, right? And like, even those people who are into that find shit like violence and snuff in those movies to be like abhorrent. So like even those people find this shit disgusting. So that should tell you something. Like, and the fact this rich guy was willing to commission a film of a little girl, like 16 or something in the movie, get murdered violently on film should just, yeah, he's just able to get away with it. Like that's just the whole concept here.
Least surprising twist in a movie is Longdale being in on it. Because when we are introduced, when Wells is introduced to the widow and he sees the tape, the whole time as Wells is talking to the widow, Longdale's kind of interjecting and going, yeah, but how much realistic violence is on TV every day? And I've explained to her that snuff is an urban legend. It's like, oh yeah, you're in on it.
No, 100%. It is not very surprising at all. But, at the same time, everybody's performances are great. This actor who plays Longdale is fucking great, too. Like, yeah, and like I said, I really love the explanation. Like, and to be fair, that's kind of a common motif throughout the last, like, half of this movie is that why? And there really is no good reason.
There isn't. That's the point of the movie.
But yeah, so Velvet and Machine produce a bound and beaten Max, whom they abducted to force Wells to bring them the only surviving copy of the film. And of course, as we mentioned, the setup where Longdale and Wells go out to the car. So once Wells delivers the film, Longdale and Velvet burn it and kill Max. And I also love that because like, oh, come on, just let him go. If I give you the film, will you let him go? He's like, absolutely. And then he tells Machine like, oh, let him be free. And of course, in his stupid auteur way, he's like, but that means you could kill him. And then he just like slits fucking Max's throat. And I was like, no! no.
One of the most chilling lines, and there's other variations on it in the movie to me, is when Dino destroys the film, he sets it on fire. He says, it's as if she never existed, which is such a chilling idea that the only people that will remember this girl are her desperately lonely mother and then these weird perverts that butchered her. And no one else will ever even know this happened.
Yeah, it is absolutely fucked. So, but yes, as I mentioned, so once again, they kill Max, as I said. As they're about to kill Wells, he says Mr. Christian paid $1 million for the film. Velvet Pool Machine received $50,000 and Longdale kept the major portion. And Dino's like, oh, come on, that's complete bullshit, right? And he's like, yeah, totally. And he like walks away. It's like, listen, we can just walk away from here and nothing will ever happen. And Dino says something about there's like honor among like pornographers or whatever. And
honor among perverts and pornographers, yeah.
That's it, yeah.
I remember that line specifically.
And also, I do love the line real quick. I love the line where Dino like is holding up a gun to Nick Cage's like head as he's like, you know, being bound or whatever, and he just takes like his fucking pocket photo of his family and like stuffs it in his mouth.
Yeah.
And then Nick Cage's like, oh, fine. I'll give you the film. He's like, okay, and he like spits out the picture. It's so hilarious.
Here's your picture back, and he's like, thank God.
He's like,
would you want that picture
terrible.
back?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. Because honestly, like, and you know, obviously the audience at home, like, we want you to see all the movies we review and stuff like that, but you really have to see fucking Peter Stormare's appearance in this movie. He's wearing like a bathrobe throughout the entire movie, and he looks like he washes his hair with his own spit and slicks it back.
Yeah, I'm not joking when I say it's Batman villain. And it's specifically like, it's like Schumacher Batman. It's like, this could be a character in Batman Forever.
Yeah, no, it's just absolutely fucking wild. In the ensuing fight, Velvet and Longdale are killed. Wells wounds Machine and escapes. Now, I also do love this because it's basically a comedy of errors. So fucking Dino shoots Longdale with the crossbow, and then Longdale's like, oh, fuck, I'm gonna die. Might as well take another one with me. So he shoots fucking Dino in the neck with a fucking bullet. Actually, very similar to the scene in fucking Wolf Creek, where he's like, oh shit, yeah. I got shot in the neck, and he like dies or whatever. And then his very last words are something like, Machine, take care of this for me. And he just dies like, it's like I said, very Batman villain shit.
Yeah, as he's dying too, he says, this isn't right. I'm supposed to have a more cinematic death. It's very campy. And I do think, not to put too fine a point on it, I think the campiness is part of what confused audiences. Because you've got on one hand, this is this very serious movie. It's a neo-noir. It's kind of a meditation on like the world of porn and how it's dying as like we're entering the new millennium and kind of like the fringe part of that community. And then there's also, again, like Batman level camp and like goofy kind of tongue-in-cheek humor to it. Yeah. And I wonder if people were just like, how am I supposed to feel about this?
And then, so talk about another scene that makes me feel certain things. So yeah, once again, Nick Cage is able to escape. He wounds Machine, and fucking him and James Gandolfini like go off into a chase. And I also love this because once again, it's James Gandolfini chasing Nick Cage, and like, yeah, James Gandolfini chasing with a gun. They eventually get in a car and like drive off. And once again, Arabic music is playing in New York City in like fucking fall. It makes no sense.
You know, when I think of chase music, I think of Arabic kind of world music.
When I think of Tony Soprano chasing Nick Cage, I think of Arabic music. Oh, shit. But yeah, eventually he's able to get away. Wells calls Mrs. Christian to tell her his discoveries and convinces her of going to the police. Arriving at her estate, Wells is told that Mrs. Christian committed suicide after hearing the news. And I also do love this scene. So Nick Cage has a cell phone. This is like 1999. So it's like one of those like old school flip phones, basically. And he's like calling her like, listen, everything in the movie is real. Like everything you ever believed about your husband is a lie. Please don't kill yourself. I'll be there tonight. And she's like, oh, okay. And then she just kills herself.
Yeah.
I love, like, and to be fair, you know, he is being chased by a fucking murderer, so I can understand his obvious mental state at the time, but it's just hilarious. She's like, listen, everything you've ever believed is a lie. This is an actual real film. Like, please talk to me tonight. And he just sees this, like, woman who's on her deathbed is like, oh yeah, that totally won't kill her, Nick Cage. And he's, like, shocked when she finds out she died.
Maybe he should have waited to tell her in person.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, goddamn. But yeah, so she left envelopes for the Matthews family and Wells. Wells contains the rest of his payment in a note reading, quote, try and forget us, unquote. Wells warns his wife of the impending danger and seeks shelter in a location known only to them and hands her his half of the money. Now, we didn't really get into Nick Cage's family in this movie. So he has a wife and like a newborn daughter. In a lot of the scenes where he's like finding out more information about Marianne Matthews, he like looks at his daughter like longingly sometimes. And it's just like, oh yeah, well, this little girl was probably murdered. And he's like looking at his own little girl. girl, and I think he's like getting obviously feelings about that. He's also lying about smoking to his wife, which is like a common like sort of side plot element to it. He's kind of lying to her throughout the entire investigation because, as you mentioned, he's like, he's a consummate professional. He keeps everything as confidential as he possibly can and letting his wife in on as little as possible. And obviously she doesn't like that because she's worried for her own safety and her family's safety. But at the end of the day, I mean, Nick Cage he's doing the best that he can in this fucking movie. I think we can all agree on that. Like
presumably he was a private eye when he met her. It's not like they'd been married for 10 years and he was like, I think I'm going to get into private investigating.
He was a fucking assistant manager at McDonald's, like, oh, I should become a PI. Like, it's fucking 9 years in.
She knew.
Exactly. And then in like the last 30 minutes, this movie just goes off the fucking walls. I love it. So Wells decides to seek justice for Marianne by killing the remaining people involved. Wells returns to Hollywood and tracks down Poole. He takes him to the shooting location and tries to kill him, but he is hesitant. Now, I also do love the scenes where, he just beats the fuck out of Poole, and he's just like, oh, tell me how it happened. And he's like, well, listen, she was kind of nervous, so I smacked the shit out of her, and then Dino gave her some drugs to calm her down, and then we did the scene or whatever. And then he's like, but you watched in the corner here. Why'd you watch? She's like, I don't fucking know. Kind of made me sick, to be honest, but why does it fucking matter anyways? And then Nick Cage like bounds him up. He's like, I'm gonna fucking kill you. And then like Poole's like, oh yeah, I bet you can't fucking do it. That's your own gun. You want to kill me? He calls him like a pussy. Yeah. He calls him the F word and all that.
You'll have to dig the bullet out of my brains. That'll be nice, huh?
He also like licks the fucking barrel. The guy's like, kill me. And it's just,
put me out of my misery. Yeah,
you want to fucking kill me? Just put me out of my misery. It's so good. It is so goddamn hilarious. But yeah, so eventually he calls Mrs. Matthews to tell her about her daughter and asks for her permission, essentially, to punish those responsible. Mrs. Matthews breaks down once presented with the truth, but affirms that she loved her daughter. With that, Wells beats Poole to death with a pistol. He pistol whips him to death. I mean, we don't see it in the movie necessarily, but you see Nick Cage's like bloody gun and his like hand shaking as he walks out of the fucking like cabin or whatever. And then you see James Gandolfini's like bludgeoned in fucking bloody head. It's just great. It's so ridiculous. Oh my god. And then eventually he burns down the cabin with a bunch of the pornography that he was able to find either at fucking his office or his illegal pursuits or whatever. And like I also love that scene because he just like walks away like a fucking action villain with the fucking like burned cabin. It's so good. And then in the final scenes here, Wells then attacks Machine at his home. Now, one of the trivia facts I had here is Joel Schumacher actually found this location personally while he was doing location scouting, and it was apparently a dead-end street in Queens, New York that was right next to a Catholic cemetery. So that was like a real life location. It wasn't a set at all. So I thought
that's crazy. Cool. That's a great set.
It really is. And also, we were talking about how shit the soundtrack is. There is genuinely one amazing soundtrack moment. I think Joel Schumacher had like an idea of the soundtrack of this movie being like a fucking RPG. Like he put all of his skills points in the final musical moments of this film. Like seriously. So just to set up, so Wells goes to this dead end street in like New York City. He finds Machine by calling various hospitals in New York City asking about a man who had recently had a stab wound. And they're like, oh yeah, this guy and this and that. By the way, that would never fucking happen. If somebody works in healthcare,
that's what I was thinking.
There's HIPAA. That would never fucking happen, but whatever. It's a movie. Who cares? And eventually he once again makes it to the house. He finds like an old lady living there. He's a guy who lives with his fucking mom. Like just a guy, like a weird nerdy guy who lives with his mom. She gets on like a church van at one point outside of the house, and it's just really bizarre. And then he makes it his way into the house, and you just hear the Aphex Twin song. What song is that?
Come to Daddy.
Come to Daddy, that's it. And also, when Nick Cage meets Dino Velvet, you actually see the music video for that song playing in his office, which I think is really funny. And you also hear it on his videos, though, too. So, like, this is a very well-featured song. And the various lyrics to Come to Daddy that are very appropriate for this specific scene, as he's, like, going through the house, like, looking for Machine, it takes, like, 2 or 3 minutes. And, like, the record player stops at one point, and then he's like, oh, shit. Then it picks up again, and that's when Machine attacks him. It's so good.
So, the cool thing with that scene, and it is like structured to me like a final boss fight in a video game.
Yes.
Is the record's playing as Wells goes to the house. So Wells turns the record off. And that makes it, when you hear the record come back on, I think that makes it really scary. Because it's kind of like, I think, the idea is that Wells isn't sure if Machine is home in that moment, so he turns the record off. And then when it comes back on, then he's nearby.
No, exactly. And yeah, you're talking about boss fight, like, and then he gets like pushed out of the house at one point and they fall into the cemetery. And Wells unmasks him in this ensuing brawl, revealing a bespectacled man named George. Now, or bespectacled man named George.
Bespectacled?
Yeah, bespectacled. Bespectacled, like the shit you put on walls. Yeah.
Yeah.
They struggle and Wells kills him. And I also love a lot of the dialogue. So as we mentioned earlier, like a lot of the latter half of this movie, all the explanations for anything in this movie is because it happened, or because I could, or because I liked it. And Machine's reason for doing all this, he's like, listen, I wasn't beaten, I wasn't raped, my daddy didn't molest me, I just hurt women and I kill people because I like it, because I want to. And it's just like, I wish I would have put that actor on here, but that actor is just so good at saying those specific lines. Like, you believe that this character genuinely believes that he just wants to fucking watch people hurt, and like he wants to hurt people. He just loves
Also, he looks like a forums moderator, which is important.
He looks like if there was like a like gay porn adaptation of a David Koechner movie and he's playing David Koechner's role.
Yep.
But yeah, so I really do love this actor as George in this movie. And like I said, his final lines are just so fucking good.
Imagine if that character, who even kind of looks like him, imagine it George Costanza. Imagine the exact same mask comes off, it's George Costanza.
You think he's like, there's like a video of him murdering a different girl and he like just slams on the table. He's like, I'm done.
I'm done.
But yeah, so after returning to his family, Wells breaks down in front of his wife, trying to process all the evil that he had seen over the course of the investigation. And like, to be fair, his wife does see a lot of this going on, but just imagine, like, he's gone for like a month. He's came back. At one point, he comes wearing handcuffs, and then he shows up like with a fucking stab wound in his stomach, and his wife's like, yeah, I'm thinking about divorce.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. But months later, Wells receives a letter from Mrs. Matthews in the mail, thanking him and relating her gratitude for the fact that, in spite of everything, she and Wells were the only people who really cared about Mary Ann, which, I mean, that's like the one hopeful message at the end of this movie, kind of, is that, like, this poor woman who, you know, had her daughter fucking violently murdered and just nobody knew or cared enough to fucking find it. And, like, Nicolas Cage was willing to murder multiple people to make that right. Like, goddamn.
That is the closest thing to a happy, and I would say there's a happiness. I mean, like, you know, that's all that you get in this is just at least she has the knowledge that someone other than her cared enough about her daughter to like invest in it and to find out the truth for her.
Exactly, 100%. That is definitely the closest the movie comes to a happy ending because, like, boy, nobody else has a happy ending in this movie.
I mean, I'm going to say I kind of think that Wells still ended up getting a divorce eventually.
Oh, 100% ass fucking. But you know what? Speaking of people who definitely have very divorced people energy, before we get into our final thoughts, Brian, let's get into these Amazon reviews because I told you off air, these are some of the most fucking batshit insane Amazon reviews I've ever found.
I'm dreading it.
But yeah, so let's get into it. So our first review is from Rob G, who gives this film 5 stars. And the header of the review says, "This is one of the best movies I have ever seen in a thriller suspense." And the body of the review says, "This is one of the best movies I have ever seen in a thriller suspense style. The director hands down got on my edge for the whole movie." And you know what? Joel Schumacher, good on you for helping this guy edge. Good on you for that. I'm sure he appreciated that very much so.
Concise. That's what we like here.
And like, to a lot of people who may listen to this episode and they're like, why is he yelling? Because they're always in caps. This person's yelling throughout the entire review.
Yeah,
like a
these
crazy
people
person.
fucking love to yell. How old is this review, by the way?
I think this is like a 10 or 15-year-old review, I want to say.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think it was like 2010s-ish, I think, from when I remember looking at it. And then our next review here is from Julian Wasser, who gives us 5 stars. And the header of the review says, "More Hollywood fantasy." And the body of the review says, "Preposterous story, but worth watching. As usual, it's not art, it's entertainment." And the bottom of the review is Julian Wasser in Los Angeles. So they sign off on it. And for whatever reason, they included a pic of 2 old ladies and one of them's holding a cat. So I don't know if this person's like plugging their art in the review or they just found a random picture of 2 old ladies and one of them's holding a cat. I don't understand.
You know, the sign of a good review is always when you could post the review under almost literally under any film and it would still make sense.
You know, like, actually, somebody posted this exact review with the exact picture on the Cars, on Cars 2. I guarantee you.
I mean, like, for real, was this written by like an AI?
I don't know, but like I said, for whatever reason, they got a picture of these 2 old ladies and a cat. I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, you know, Taylor, you know how much I love the Amazon reviews. You know how much I love to get in touch with the people, the real salt of the earth movie lovers.
Yeah, you know, morons.
Dumb fucking pieces of shit.
And then speaking of dumb pieces of shit, so our next review here is from Nani Rose, who gives us 4 stars. And the head of the review says, dark subject. And the body of the review says, parallels 2023 Sound of Freedom. A lot of cussing and violence.
Okay.
Okay.
Haven't seen Sound of Freedom yet, so maybe.
But obviously you know about Sound of Freedom.
I know,
right?
I know.
I have seen Sound of Freedom. This movie has nothing in common with Sound of Freedom. Nothing. I mean, I guess the closest thing is that the real life guy was genuinely like fucking underage prostitutes while trying to catch underage prostitute fucking smugglers. So I don't know.
Well, you know, the like cute
He's
people.
Dino Velvet. He's James Gandolfini.
Didn't he like enlist a woman to help him, and then he was like kept from molesting her, and he said that he had to because they were undercover as husband and wife.
Yep, and I love how that revelation came out like 2 months after the movie came out. So, God.
And none of those people gave a shit.
Nope, not at all. So, yeah, I thought that review was great. And then the final review I have here, and this person I think genuinely needs to be in a psych ward, but our final review here is from DCMJ, who gives us 1 star. And the header of the review says, this is a hate crime snuff F.D up disturbing WTF Amazon. And the body of the review says, Amazon is now supporting murder and snuff films. WTF, no longer watch Nick Cage.
So this person thinks it would appear that the author of this review thinks that this is a literal snuff film that is portrayed in this film. 8mm was made to covertly show the snuff film within it, I guess. Huge if true.
That's fucking crazy.
I gotta tell you, if that is true, then I change my opinion on this movie. That is bad news.
I agree. That is no good, folks. We do not like it.
We do not like snuff films on this podcast. I have yet to see one with any sort of cinematic value, any sort of production value. Not a fan of snuff.
You know, Brian, I just have to say, just like all of my DSA oomfies, yikes and oof. That's what I have to say. If true, y'all, we don't like it. Oh my God. But yeah.
Snuff is bad, but y'all aren't ready to have that conversation.
And I remember telling you off air, I had like 6 or 7 of these lined up, but I'm like, I don't want to include all of them because, listen, I do love the Amazon reviews, but I don't want to go for 4 hours on the Amazon reviews because, like I said, there were 6 or 7 reviews that were just so batshit insane that I wanted to include them, but I narrowed it down to 4 because holy shit, some of these, like half of the 1-star reviews are literally like Satan himself made this movie, like completely unironically saying that.
I bet any movie that involves mention of snuff or any sort of like violent pornography in the post-Q era is swamped with reviews like that now.
Oh God, absolutely. And also, you know what? I'm going to cheat. I'm going to put one more on here.
Yeah, do as many as you want. I love talking about 8mm.
Yes. And this one makes me mad. So Amazon customer gives us 1 star. And the head of the review says, Cage is terrible. And the body of the review says, one of the best actors in Hollywood, Joaquin Phoenix, couldn't save or prevent the worst actor in Hollywood from ruining this movie. I'm sorry, who thinks Nick Cage is the worst actor in Hollywood?
Really? I mean, this is a person who doesn't know. They've seen people make jokes about Nick Cage, and then they base their opinion on that, on like memes they saw.
I'm sorry, like, if you genuinely think that Nick Cage is the worst actor in Hollywood, you are clinically R-worded. I'm sorry, there's no other fucking thing to say about that. Like, there's worse actors who have been in the worst Nick Cage movies. Like, seriously. Listen, everybody in 211 is way worse than Nick Cage, and Nick Cage was probably on set for 30 minutes for that movie, okay? Like, goddamn. Oh my God. Honestly, Brian, and I remember when we talked about it on Cage Fight, holy fuck, dude, you have to watch 211. Genuinely in probably my bottom 10 worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life. That is such a fucking trash movie. It is unbelievable. Even for Nick Cage's like fucking nadir of his film career. That movie is just dreadful. Holy fuck. Imagine this, a movie that claims to take place in Boston, that you can visibly see Romanian letters on the street signs as they're driving through.
Amazing. That's awesome. I stand.
And at one point, like, there's, like, a person who's, like, trying to take, like, the off-ramp to Boston, and literally you could see, like, they fucking green screened a sign that says, to Boston, take exit.
Maybe I do need to see this movie. Oh, no. Oh, no.
It does have Nick Cage's son in it, though, so that's kind of interesting.
What's his name? What's his first name?
I don't remember. It's the one that's, like, a fat goth guy.
Goth Cage?
Yeah, Goth Cage. Have you seen like Nick Cage's like black metal goth son?
Oh no, that sounds
Yeah.
like a character in like a Tim and Eric sketch.
Oh yeah, here we go. I'm posting this shit in the fucking chat right now. So
Please.
get ready for this shit. And like I said, this is his biological son who he doesn't look like this at all in 211, but seriously, look at this.
Amazing. Respect to both of them.
He looks like he's trying to cosplay Euronymous.
He does, yeah. I like that he looks very much like his father. He has those very distinct cheekbones.
Oh yeah, he does.
Good for him. They should start a band together, like maybe a black metal Elvis
Oh yeah.
band.
Yeah, just imagining like fucking shoegaze and going, "Oh, baby."
I would be down. I am down. I'm open to it.
I would at least listen to it. I think he literally was in a black metal band too, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, you almost have to be when you look like this.
His name is Weston Cage. That's his name.
Do you think he ever goes by Wes?
Ooh, Wes Cage. I will say though, like the one thing, so Nick Cage has definitely not ever been the best husband. I think we can all agree on that. But he seems like a genuinely good dad. He's like, hey, you're into black metal and you're goth or whatever at like 35 years old. Good for you, son.
I mean, Nick was into hip music. He listened to early hardcore. He's friends with Johnny Ramone,
Oh yeah.
Cool shit.
His taste, like honestly, Nick Cage's taste in fashion is lit. He always is dressed incredibly. Have you seen the one where he's like half the photos he's in recently, he's like wearing like Japanese Godzilla t-shirts and shit?
Yes, I have.
He also wears like that fucking like purple suit, like Kakihara if he was an American.
He for real does have like rockabilly fashion.
Oh shit, yeah, God, we fucking love Nick Cage. But speaking of loving Nick Cage things, do we have any final thoughts before we end this episode, Brian?
One thing that I want to finish up with is people accuse this movie of being a ripoff of hardcore, which we spoke about last episode. I think we both agree it's clearly influenced by hardcore. It's got some strong reference points. Not only do I not really think this is a ripoff of hardcore, I think it is thoroughly better. I think that it makes more sense just from a plot level. I think it comes together well. I also feel like the filmmakers of 8mm did more research on the world of porn than the filmmakers behind hardcore. And I think that 8mm has a clearer understanding of what it wants to do and what it wants to say. So hardcore is this descent into kind of the world of porn. But what is that? Of course, for our protagonist in hardcore, it's really seeming awful because he's a Calvinist. But on its own, it's like, okay, it's porn. To most of the audience by 79 had seen hardcore porn, probably somewhat regularly. With 8mm, you're really diving into fringe stuff and much farther into it. I think that it starts and ends, there's more of a straight line with 8mm. I would say that it does the same descent into hell thing, but I think I buy into it more just because with 8mm, the subject is so unquestionably dark and depraved. We go so deep into it. I think that if this is a quote unquote ripoff of hardcore, it's in its reference points. It does follow sort of the same beats, but I think the performances are completely different. The performances in hardcore are very naturalistic, whereas I think the performances in 8mm are really heightened, and like I said, they have a strong sense of camp.
Yes, exactly. And I'll definitely relay a lot of your points. Even though I do love hardcore, until the very end with the snuff film that may or may not be real, as, you posited in your theory, which I think legitimately could be a good interpretation of what, the movie is overall. He's not a reliable narrator or whatever. But, until that point, most of the shit that he's finding, really isn't that bad, especially by modern standards. That's, pretty normal pornography.
Yeah.
Whereas in this movie, pretty much from the get-go, I mean, obviously from the get-go, because the first thing we see of porn in this movie is a fucking snuff film, but pretty much all the pornography in this movie is pretty extreme pornography, a lot of extreme bondage, others type of fetish material, at one
There's
point
an enema film.
Actually, one of the trivia facts I have is that was actually a real porn film. That was not a fake porn. That was not a fake porn film for this movie. That was a real porn movie. So I thought that was really funny.
Schumacher talks about that in his commentary as well. I wish I still had that DVD. It's great.
No, absolutely. And like, but no, you're totally right. Like, Joel Schumacher did a lot of research, like you can clearly tell, or I should say maybe Andrew Kevin Walker did a lot of research for this too. Like, this movie definitely has, I think, a better understanding of like the more illicit or even some of just the more extreme side of like legal pornography than hardcore did. Because, you know, it was a movie once again made in late 70s. You know, it was made by a guy who had fairly recently come from an extremely religious background. You know, that's going to skew things a certain amount versus, you know, an out and out. I mean, I know we mentioned it earlier, but Joel Schumacher is just like an aggressively gay man, just like aggressively gay, and like a guy who put a lot of that sort of like that part of his personality into
That sensibility.
movies. Yeah, exactly. You talk about camp, you know, you're talking about a lot of movies that, you know, featured more homoerotic elements in it, like a lot of his movies did. So somebody who probably naturally has an understanding of just what outside of the norm is of sexuality for a lot of people. So he understands that portraying that in at least in a more thorough way is at least worth it in a movie versus hardcore is just like, oh yeah, porn exists and this guy who's like a religious fucking fanatic by our standards is like seeing this shit and it's like he's so horrified by it or whatever. And also like, even though this movie is quite a bit longer than hardcore, I think this movie's about 15 minutes longer. I think the pacing in this movie is quite a bit better than hardcore because even though I like hardcore, of course I like hardcore as a movie, the pacing in that movie isn't the best, I'll be honest. There's a lot of scenes that just kind of go on maybe a little too long and don't necessarily have a purpose. Whereas this movie, I think every scene, no matter how ridiculous it is, has a point to it.
If anyone is interested, actually, Schumacher and his crew, they did a good amount of research. In high school, I actually read a book at Schumacher's recommendation, because again, he talks about it on the commentary of the DVD I had, called Gods of Death, Around the World Behind Closed Doors by Jaren Svorve. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but he's an investigative reporter who had previously done a lot of work investigating the underworld, like neo-Nazi movement in Germany. This book, Gods of Death, is about, you know, him really delving into kind of like in this movie, the fringe of pornography to figure out if snuff is real or not. It's a very good book, and you can see when you read it, you know, there are, you know, a good number, as I recall, of solid sources cited and things, but it does parallel, Svorve's experience does parallel Wells in this film in a lot of ways. Although his answers he comes to about snuff existing as an industry are inconclusive, he says.
Yeah, and I really want to get into that in our final movie, the trilogy, and I'm just going to say this outright. It's going to be Vacancy, the 2007 movie. And, like, I really want to put to bed the idea of, like, snuff existing. As we mentioned in the hardcore episode, we both agree that this sort of clandestine operation of, like, various underground, like, pornographers or just, you know, venturing capitalists, we'll just say, just murdering people on film for profit doesn't really exist. But the idea of people making movies that show murder to either get shock value, as of course we mentioned with Leighton LaBute, or as we mentioned with the Dnipro Maniacs, that kind of stuff absolutely exists 100%.
And certainly, as long as videos like that do exist, there will be, at the very least, a third party who is unscrupulous enough to profit off of it. But I think that is more likely what we will continue to see rather than a traditional snuff film where someone films a murder specifically to sell it.
I think the closest we will ever get is if anybody, and I don't even know if they made money off of this, they probably didn't, to be honest with you, but anybody who made money off of hosting sites like Best Score and LiveLeak. That's the closest I could imagine.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. But yeah, so with that out of the way, let's get into our final pluggables. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on twitter.com. And also please follow us on both Spotify and YouTube, where we're uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well, please donate to the GoFundMe for Lucifer and the Father. Of course, we've had Robert and Scott and Sean all on the show to talk about their various projects, and especially this project. Please help us get the next episode of Lucifer and the Father off the ground and on the air. Please. It is a good project.
Yeah, agreed. Please check out Lucifer and the Father and throw a couple bucks their way if you can. Again, Sean and Scott and Robert are all great friends of the show. For my pluggables, you know, you can follow me at John Stab on Twitter, JONSTABB. More importantly, you can follow the Millennials Are Old podcast Instagram account and the Millennials Are Old Facebook group. Started to branch out more there into like conversational posts and kind of like, I guess, testing the temperature in groups and conversations about generational things and pop culture. really trying to get some kind of boomer Facebook people to engage in an earnest way with the account and kind of get some perspectives, that are different from ours. But yeah, if you keep up with all of our posts there, if you want to see, I'm very mad about the Oscars, as Taylor knows, so I'll probably be posting more about that. I've never had opinions about the Oscars before in my life, I don't think, but I suddenly do.
You know what? That's the thing that elderly millennials do. They care about award shows. The older millennial you get, the more you care about award shows, I guess.
Taylor, you got to see Barbie.
Oh, I'm actually watching it this weekend. I have it queued up as my next movie.
Well, I don't know. Have I talked about it on the show before, how I feel about it?
Yes, actually, let's wait for the vacancy episode because, we talk about snuff and watching film die. Ooh, boy.
I wish that Barbie had turned into a snuff film 2/3 of the way through.
Oh, shit.
Please don't. I'm kidding. It's fine. It's fine. I'm glad that everyone likes it. I'm glad you're having a good time. I'm glad you feel seen by this fucking cartoon movie.
And before we get Barbie fans coming after us to murder us, let's sign off here before that happens. So have a good night, everybody.
Yeah, well, so after you see Barbie, I do want to go in on it.
Oh, hell yeah, dude.
I feel like I'm going crazy. Everyone loves it but me.
But like I said, before the Swifties and before the Barbie fans come after us, let's sign off, Brian. So have a good night, man. I'm scared.
Have a good night, Taylor. Have a good night, Barbie fans. Please listen. Any girls listening, hey, I actually love Barbie. Let's hang out and you can explain to me why it's good. I'd love to hear that.
Hey, Barbie fans, let's go party. No, that's terrible.
Fade out.
Hell yeah. Fuck off, everybody. No, I'm just kidding. Have a good night.